Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are shifting gears a little bit. We are putting aside the big philosophical questions and going into what we're calling last-minute lecture mode.
hmm
We know a lot of you might be staring down a microbiology exam, maybe prepping for boards, or, maybe just realize you don't actually know how a virus works. So we're tackling Chapter 23 from Lippincott Illustrated Reviews, Microbiology, the Introduction to the Viruses.
That's right. And honestly, this chapter is the bedrock.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't get the architecture and the replication strategies we're going to talk about, the rest of virology is just a nightmare of memorization.
Right, just a bunch of random facts.
Exactly. You'll be trying to memorize bugs without a framework.
Yeah.
But if you get the rules, like why a virus's structure dictates how you catch it, everything else just starts to click into place.
Okay, so our mission is simple. We're going to break down the viral architecture, how they replicate, and, how they mess with the host. We'll try to visualize the figures in the text for you. So let's start with the absolute basics. The text defines a virus as an acellular infectious agent. That sounds so dry.
It does, but acellular is the key. It means it's not a cell. That's the whole thing. It has no nucleus, no organelles, no metabolism of its own. It can't make energy. It's, at a minimum, just two things.
Yeah.
A genome and a box to put it in.
A box with instructions inside.
That's it. You have the genome, the nucleic acid, which is DNA or RNA, and a protein shell around it called a capsid. The two of them together are called the nucleocapsid. If you've got that, you have a virion, a complete virus particle.
I like the analogy of a delivery system. It feels almost military. It's a package designed to protect a payload and get it into a hostile environment.
It is a delivery system.
Yeah.
And the payload is just information. It's the instructions on how to make more of itself. But here's rule number one, and this is a classic exam trap. A virus has DNA or RNA, but never both.
Never both. That's a hard and fast rule.
It is a hard rule. Our cells have both, bacteria have both, viruses pick one, and that genome can be single-stranded or double-stranded.
Which is weird, right? Because we usually think of DNA as double-stranded and RNA as single-stranded.
Exactly. But in the viral world, you can have single-stranded DNA and double-stranded RNA. And when your immune system sees, say, double-stranded RNA floating around, it just lights up. It knows immediately, this is not ours. This is an invader.
It's a huge red flag. Okay, we'll get into the whole positive versus negative sense thing in a bit, because I know that's tricky. But let's stick with the structure. We have the genome and the capsid protecting it. The text describes two main shapes for this capsid: helical and icosahedral.
Right. So for helical, just think of a coiled spring. Like in figure 23.4, you have these protein units called protomers
Yeah.
that just spiral around the nucleic acid.
Like a slinky, and the genetic material is kind of wound up inside it.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And here's a high-yield fact the text points out. All human viruses that have this helical shape are enveloped and contain RNA.
Whoa, okay, that's huge. So if you see a question describing a human virus with a helical capsid,
You automatically know it's RNA and it's got an envelope? Saves you a ton of thinking.
great tip. Okay, so that's the coil. The other shape is icosahedral. That's the sort of geometric soccer ball shape in figure 23.5.
Exactly. It's made of these subunits called capsomers. It's an incredibly efficient, strong way to build a hollow sphere to protect the genome. It's just structural perfection.
Okay, coil and soccer ball. But then there's the coat, the envelope. This seems to be the biggest dividing line in virology: naked versus enveloped viruses. Why does this one distinction matter so much?
This is probably the most important clinical distinction in the whole chapter. The envelope is a lipid bilayer, a membrane. But here's the thing, the virus doesn't make it. It steals it from the host cell when it leaves.
So it's wearing the host's skin as a disguise.
Sort of, yeah. But it studs that membrane with its own viral proteins. Now here's this so what. You'd think having this extra layer, this envelope, would make the virus stronger, right?
Yeah, that's what I would think. More layers, more armor.
It's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
That envelope is a lipid membrane. Think of it like a layer of fat or oil. What happens to fat when you hit it with soap or acid or even just let it dry out?
It just dissolves. It breaks down completely.
Exactly. So enveloped viruses are actually incredibly fragile. They need to stay wet to survive, and that tells you exactly how they're transmitted, usually through respiratory droplets, blood, sexual contact, things that are direct and, well, wet.
That completely flips my intuition. So the viruses we worry about from sneezes or blood are usually the enveloped ones.
Yes. And that's why washing your hands with soap is so effective against them. You're literally dissolving their outer layer.
Whereas the naked viruses, the ones without that envelope, are just that tough protein shell.
And that protein shell is like a hard plastic case. It can survive stomach acid. It can survive drying out on a countertop for days. So how do you think those are transmitted?
Well, if it can survive the stomach, it has to be fecal-oral route, contaminated food or water.
You got it. You should immediately be thinking naked virus,
Yeah.
rotavirus, norovirus. They're tough. They can handle the gut.
Yeah.
So just from knowing if it has an envelope or not, you can predict how a disease spreads. It's epidemiology, not just trivia.
I love that. Okay, let's move on to the life cycle. The text brings up this concept, the one-step growth curve, in figure 23.7. And it has this really strange phase at the beginning called the eclipse period.
Ah, yes. This is a paradox that always trips students up. Imagine you infect a dish of cells with a virus. If you grind up those cells 5 minutes later and look for infectious virus particles, you find zero.
None, but I just put them in there.
None. The infectivity just vanishes.
So where did it go?
It took itself apart. To replicate, the virus has to uncoat. It has to open the capsid and release its genome. And once it's in pieces, it's not an infectious virion anymore. It's just a pile of spare parts inside the cell.
So the eclipse period is the construction phase. The delivery truck has been stripped for parts, and the factory is building new ones, but none are finished yet.
That's a perfect way to put it. This period lasts from that uncoating until the very first new progeny virion is assembled. It's the dark phase.
And then after that,
Then you get exponential growth. The graph and the figure just shoot straight up. You're talking yields of hundreds, even thousands of new virions from a single infected cell.
until the cell just runs out of resources, I assume?
Exactly. It's a resource war. The virus hijacks everything, amino acids, nucleotides, energy, until the cell is exhausted and dies.
Okay, so let's walk through those steps. It all starts with adsorption, which is a fancy word for attachment.
Correct. But it's very specific. A virus doesn't just bump into any cell and stick. It's a lock-and-key mechanism. The virus has surface proteins that have to bind to a very specific receptor on the host cell.
And that's what gives viruses tissue specificity, right? Why the flu virus hits my lungs and not my liver.
Precisely. The text really emphasizes this. If your liver cells don't have the right lock for the flu virus's key, the virus just bounces off. That's called tropism.
So we've attached, now we have to get inside. The text describes two main ways: receptor-mediated endocytosis and membrane fusion.
Right. Think of endocytosis as the cell swallowing the virus whole. That's figure 23.9. The cell membrane wraps around it and pulls it into a little bubble called an endosome.
A Trojan horse.
It is. But then the virus has to break out of that bubble before the cell's garbage disposal system, the lysosome, fuses with it and digests it.
And the other way, membrane fusion.
That's for the enveloped viruses. Figure 23.10 shows it. Since their envelope is made of the same stuff as the cell membrane, they can just merge. It's like two soap bubbles becoming one. The capsid gets dumped right into the cytoplasm.
Okay, so we're in. We've uncoated. The eclipse period is on. Now for the hard part, replication. This is where I think the last-minute lecture really needs to focus, because these diagrams, 23.1 through 23.15, they can get messy.
This is the heavy lifting for sure, but there's a golden rule you have to remember. mRNA is king.
Explain that. Why is mRNA king?
Because no matter what kind of genome a virus starts with, it has to make messenger RNA. It has to. The host ribosome, which is the cell's protein factory, only reads one language, positive sense mRNA. If a virus wants to make proteins, it must produce mRNA.
Got it. Okay, let's start with the easy ones then, the DNA of viruses in figure 23.11.
DNA is usually more straightforward. Most DNA viruses just travel to the nucleus. They use the host cell's own enzymes to transcribe their DNA into mRNA, just like the cell does with its own genes.
The text mentions pox viruses are an exception here.
Yep, pox viruses are the big rule breakers. They're so large and complex, they basically bring their own replication machinery with them and do everything in the cytoplasm. But as a general rule, DNA viruses replicate in the nucleus.
Okay, now for the RNA viruses, this is where it gets tricky. Type I, single-stranded RNA, positive polarity.
All right, so positive polarity or positive sense.
Yeah.
This is the easy one. It means the viral RNA looks just like mRNA to the cell.
So it's already in the language the ribosome can read.
Exactly. The moment it gets into the cytoplasm, the ribosome latches on and starts making viral protein. It hits the ground running.
And one of the first things it makes is that special enzyme, right? The RNA-dependent RNA polymerase.
You got it.
Yeah.
And we need to pause on that name. Our cells do not have an enzyme that can make copies of RNA from an RNA template. We only make RNA from DNA. So the virus has to provide the instructions for its own special RNA photocopier.
So type I is positive, gets translated right away, makes its own polymerase, and then uses that to make more copies. Simple enough.
Right.
Now, type 2, single-stranded RNA, negative polarity.
Okay, this is the tricky one. Negative polarity means the RNA is the mirror image of mRNA. It's antisense. To a ribosome, it's complete gibberish. It cannot be translated.
So if that virus just injects its RNA, nothing happens. It's a dead end.
It's a dead end. The cell would just chew it up. So this type of virus has a critical requirement. It must carry the finished polymerase enzyme inside the virion. It has to pack the photocopier in its luggage before it leaves the last cell.
That is a massive distinction. So type, I can make the enzyme on-site because it's readable, but type 2 has to bring it prepackaged.
Precisely. The moment it enters, that packaged enzyme gets to work transcribing the negative strand into a readable positive strand. Then the infection can start.
Okay, what about type 3, the double-stranded RNA viruses?
They have the same problem. Double-stranded RNA can't be read by a ribosome. So just like the negative-strand viruses, they also have to carry their own polymerase in the virion to make mRNA.
So a key rule, negative sense and double-stranded RNA viruses must carry the enzyme. Positive sense doesn't have to.
That's a huge takeaway. Remember that.
And finally, type 4, the retroviruses.
The rebels. These are technically positive sense RNA, but they play by totally different rules. They go backwards.
Backwards how?
They carry an enzyme you've probably heard of, reverse transcriptase. Think HIV.
Right. It turns RNA back into DNA.
Exactly. It reverses the central dogma of biology. It makes a DNA copy of its RNA genome. Then that DNA goes into the host nucleus, and with another enzyme called integrase, it literally snips the host DNA and pastes itself in.
So it becomes a permanent part of the host's own chromosome. That's incredibly invasive.
It is. From then on, the host cell treats that viral DNA as one of its own genes. It uses its own machinery to make new viral mRNA and genomes. The virus has basically rewritten the cell's source code.
Wow. Okay, so we've replicated, we've built the parts, now we need to get out. What about release?
Two main ways, and it goes right back to our naked versus enveloped discussion. If you're a naked virus, how do you get out?
Well, you're a tough box. You don't need to be gentle. You probably just break the cell open.
Exactly. You fill the cell with so many virions that it bursts, it leases, it's a cytocidal event, the cell dies.
But the enveloped viruses have that classier method. They bud.
Budding is really cool. You can see it in figure 23.16. The virus first sends its own proteins to a patch of the host cell membrane. Then the nucleocapsid pushes up against that patch and pinches off, wrapping itself in that piece of membrane on its way out.
Like pushing through a soap bubble and taking a piece of it with you?
Perfect visual. And the key is, this doesn't have to kill the cell right away. A cell can survive and continue to shed viruses for a long time, like a little factory.
That leads us right to the final section, the effects on the host cell. We have lytic infection, which is the cell bursting. What about the others? The text lists abortive, persistent, and latent.
Right. Abortive is just a dud. A failed infection, maybe the virus was defective, nothing happens.
Persistent sounds like what you just described with budding.
It is. The cell is productively making virus, but it survives. That's a chronic or persistent infection.
And then there's latent. This feels like an important one.
Latency is where the virus is there. Its genome is in the cell, maybe even integrated into your DNA, but it's silent. It's not making any new progeny.
But it's not gone.
Not at all. It can reactivate months, years, even decades later. Shingles is the classic example. That's the chickenpox virus you had as a kid waking up from its nap in your nerves.
And the text makes a connection between these latent infections and cancer, right?
Yes, transformation. This is critical. Some viruses, when they integrate their DNA or just persist in a cell, can mess with the cell's growth controls. They can flip the switch that turns a normal cell into a tumor cell. Those are your oncogenic viruses.
It really shows that viruses aren't just simple killing machines. They have these incredibly complex interactions with host genetics.
They're not just invaders. They become part of the ecosystem of the cell.
Okay, that was a lot. Let's do a quick recap, the last-minute lecture summary of the biggest takeaways.
All right, let's drill it. 1, viruses are cellular, genome plus capsid, DNA or RNA, but never both.
Got it.
2, structure predicts transmission. Enveloped viruses are fragile, so they spread through wet routes. Naked viruses are tough. Think fecal oral.
Right. The envelope is a weakness.
3, the eclipse period. Infectivity disappears because the virus has to take itself apart to replicate.
The construction phase.
4, the big RNA rule. Positive sense can be read immediately. Negative sense and double-stranded must carry their own polymerase with them.
Negative needs a backpack.
Exactly. And 5, enveloped viruses bud out, which can lead to persistent infection. Naked viruses just rusalize the cell.
That's a really solid summary. So before we sign off, is there one last thought from this chapter that you want people to really chew on?
I think it's that concept of latency and integration, just the idea that a virus can write itself into your own DNA. It becomes, in a way, part of you. It's not just an infection. It's a passenger that can hide for your entire life, silent. It really blurs the line between self and other in this profound biological way.
A little stowaway in the genome. That is a heavy thought to end on. Well, from the entire Last Minute Lecture team, we want to say thank you for trusting us with your study session today. We really hope this makes Chapter 23 feel a little less daunting.
Good luck with the exams. You've got this.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.